Sanctions are one part of the solution that the world seems to have settled on. The second is military alliances. There's NATO, of course. We saw the birth of the AUKUS last year. We are going to have a Quad summit, although the Quad countries say that this is not a military alliance. The Chinese call it the Asian NATO. Would you say that such military alliances are really making the world safer?
I think if there is a dangerous country or the dangerous person, we have to protect myself or ourselves. So we need protection, which means NATO. And I really respect that the President and the Prime Minister of Finland, they are going to request that Finland is going to join the NATO, and also the Sweden. So what President Putin's aspect is really his guess and his hunch was wrong. Because after the COVID-19 situation, even the Japan is going to try to think to double the budget for the defense. Even the Japan, stays long time for 1% of GDP, but it's going to be doubled. How about the European countries? How about another country? They really try to, challenging themselves to protect their lives from the country and the leader who is going to try to use atomic bombs in 21st century again to the humans. That's not really understandable for the Japanese people and myself. So I think, I hope, of course, we'd like to don't use guns or weapons, and we need no more bulletproof vest. But unfortunately, some, the members try to kill some, not just the spies, but the humans, try to use poisoning some politician opponents. That's, crazy in the 21st century. We learn the 20th century that we are not going to use or do some fighting against each other. But, for example, the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, I really difficult to understand his words. I'm sorry. But truly, if he said the peace, why always against Israel? Why the Iranian tried to bomb our Japan-related tankers who import or export oil from Middle East? Why they aiming and bombing even our commercial tankers? So I'd like to ask the world's leaders, come together and talk. If you'd like to smack his face, smack in front of them. That is, saving lives of the soldiers, of the citizens. If you don't want to hit the smack, just, scissors, stone, paper, and decide. This is a world peace.
That's very interesting advice on a forum that is called Mission Peace.
Thank you, audience.
Shah Mahmood Miakhil, when you see what's happening in Ukraine, when you see the kind of threats that countries like Taiwan face, or the threat perception that the Japanese have, after the Second World War, the world said never again, but the world finds itself at the same crossroads. Do you see history repeating itself? Marco mentioned the term frozen conflict. Do you believe that Ukraine is caught in a frozen conflict? And do you relate to what's happening, that it's become the center of another proxy war?
History is repeating in different forms. But the question is, we have to learn from the history.
Why aren't we?
The reason is that it is a failure of governance in most of these countries, and also exclusion of people from decision making. So it will end up with the dictatorship. And when that's happened, then there is a ground for all kind of other actors to play. So that was the problem when I see, from Afghanistan in the region here, it is a failure of governance because it was a more political problem. It was, but the world then trying after that to find a technical solution for a political problem. And that doesn't work. Afghanistan is a good example because we have seen, the Russian, the Soviet Union occupation there, the intervention of the US, thousands of soldiers were there, a lot of money was spent, but the actual problem was not tackled there. It was just like more like cure, just symptoms, but not the real problem, which is how to build an institution, to have a democratic process in a country, inclusion of people in decision making, and also believe on the rights of others. So that was, like I said, most of politicians or decision makers, their talks and works are different. Yes, they talk nice, peace is good, and we should prevent the war, but in the same time, they just promoting the war. And so that was, history will repeat, but in different forums, because the world is changing, but we need, that was the reason I mentioned before, we have to invest now to prevent the wars, the future for the next 50 years, not 1 or 2 years. Investing on education, governance, poverty, and all these things is important. The money we spend on war, we have to spend it on peace, on prevent the conflicts and others. So maybe logically it doesn't make sense for the politicians, but for the average people in all these regions and the countries, they want peace, education, good life, and nobody wants to be in the war forever. War is, what I said, is for whatever reason it's bad. Because, in the peace process, this is peacemaking or peacekeeping, peace building. We always just focus on peacemaking, but we are not focusing on peace building, which is a long-term process, because then another war is starting, attention is changing from that. In the 90s, when the Soviets left Afghanistan, attention changed from Afghanistan, then the terrorism emerged, and then September 11 has happened, we start another war in Afghanistan. Now, the US left Afghanistan, the region, and also the international community forget Afghanistan, but we know there is many other extreme elements are just working in Afghanistan to destabilize region and also destabilize beyond the region, but we are not focusing on that, how to solve, how to create a dialogue. Because when I say we don't know exactly how it will end Afghanistan war, the reason is that we don't have a space for dialogue, for constructive dialogue and discussion and others is not existing. So it is forgot, but then Ukraine started or war in other place started, just we are working on peacemaking, but forget the peace building part of that. If we have a one peace building solved, then we go to the next one, will not happen that. So that was, the history is repeating in the same way. Thank you.
As Mr. Chaudhary also said, that the absence of war is not peace. It takes a lot more to build peace. And Afghanistan, I think, is the perfect example. The war is technically over, but there is no peace. Jane, we are sitting in Dubai, and this region is home to some of the world's most intractable conflicts. The Israel-Palestine conflict is one. And even after the Abraham Accords, one sees that the fault lines tend to resurface. The latest one over the killing of a journalist, a very unfortunate incident. The Yemen conflict is far from resolved. Syria is very much in the throes of violence. What will it take for these wars to end? And these are all wars that have no winners.
I think we will send ourselves all to the depths of despair. Everywhere you look, there is persistent violent conflict. It seems true that not one of the major monotheistic traditions in the world today can control its fringes, its fanatics, not one. Indeed, what we see increasingly are leaders speaking to the fringes to foment violence, hatred, a disregard for other human beings. And we see it everywhere. This certainly is a region beset by conflict, but no region is free of it. How do these end? Why do they end when they do? What factors combine to prevent wars from ending? Is there a political economy of war where people are profiteering from the persistent violence? Of course there is. How do we recognize the signs that peace building has taken hold? We think we know what they are intellectually, right? We think they're representative governance, broadly representative governance, right? Economic opportunity for as many as possible, and robust civil society based on the rule of law. So those three attributes are pretty uncontroversial. We think they're characteristics of a capable society. And what's the sign? Is it elections? I don't think so. I don't think elections are a sign of almost anything, really. When a government can collect non-coerced revenues from its citizens that reinvested in the country, that's a little more of a durable sign. So what will it take? I only know one thing that would take us out of a toxic cycle, whether it's a toxic political cycle or a toxic violent cycle. And that's for winners to be generous. And it's proving difficult today.
I agree. Yasuhide Nakayama, there's another conflict that the world is bracing itself for in the region that we call home. China has been practicing the invasion of Taiwan and practicing the invasion and spelling it out in so many words. Do you think that is where the next threat will be? And do you think that there is now the political will to stop misadventures of this nature?
I think this is a very important question because as an Afghanistan gentleman said, before peace building, if the next war begins, what's happening? I mean, it's turn it over again and again. So, for example, all the worldwide media only focusing on Ukraine border now. But how about the Myanmar, Burma? There is also doing some unhuman rights activities from the strong military government. And so what about the Taiwan Strait? So after Ukraine situation, invasion by Russians, if the China learn, if the Xi Jinping is smart, I don't think he's going to try to invade Taiwan. But there is, of course, a possibility, and there is some luck. I think he is thinking the two ways. One is a peaceful way. The other one is forcing by the military action. I mean, the Chinese PLA. And which option he's going to choose is, I think it depends on the world leader of the superpower is, which is the United States of America. With the President Biden's administration, if the Xi Jinping think until the Biden's administration is continuously or suddenly stopped by the democracy of the United States citizens, American citizens, before the Biden over, or even after Biden, the China try to do action within that point, the time of the period. So this is one of the way of thinking by I think the Chinese, some high position people. But once, if they try to invade Taiwan and Japan is really close geopolitically, only 110 kilometers, the closest point. So Chinese military already calculated inside of the AZIS, anti-denial air defense region, including our nation. So once war begins against Taiwan, I think the Japan, and also there is Okinawa Island, which has the U.S. military exist. So the U.S. and Japan have to, the China tried to involve with the two countries. So I hope that the China, Xi Jinping will select not the militaristic way, but the peaceful way. So that is my personal opinion.
Well, in hope we all live, you know. Before the Ukraine war began, we all said that logic dictates that this is just posturing and Vladimir Putin is not going to invade, but we saw how that played out. But Marco, I would want you to weigh in on this, and do you believe that the world is going to actively make moves to ensure that another invasion/war does not happen? And it's difficult to sanction Russia as it is. It's going to be a lot more difficult to decouple from China.
This is extremely important topic, and to ask what shall be done in order to avoid further wars, or like you mentioned, the possibility of China to attack Taiwan. I am pretty much sure that President Xi Jinping following very closely what's happening in the war of Russia against Ukraine, and also how the world reacts to this in terms of sanctions, but also in terms of global activity on the level of United Nations, for instance. So it really matters a lot if Ukraine will win this war. And actually, I don't know, is this your intentional sort of secret here on a stage, to have colors which resemble to me Ukrainian flag, blue and yellow, or if not, then it's you know, it's good to see at least that we're sitting here in under these kind of colors, because it really connects us to the much more peaceful world. Because if Ukraine can sustain as a democracy, as a country with territorial integrity and sovereignty, then this gives the signal to anyone that the war, what they can launch, will get international response. International response that actually prevents perhaps other leaders to try to do the same. But this is, in order to achieve this, we have today to really put a lot of energy, international, diplomatic, also military, in terms sending weaponry to Ukraine for their brave fight for their freedom. And from that depends very much in which kind of world we will live tomorrow.
Right. I think one of the reasons why the world goes into conflict, if I may, is also because too much power rests in the hands of a handful of people, and they dictate policies and politics. I remember reading a very interesting story that involves Japan and the US, and you mentioned the attack. And back then, the US Secretary of War, you know, they had a list of the cities in Japan that were to be bombed, and Kyoto was on the list. And this gentleman had been to Kyoto on his honeymoon, and so he'd seen the rich culture and beauty of the city, and so he struck off Kyoto and he put Nagasaki there. And it was a very telling story, because it shows you how some people and their whims and fancies can seal the fate of millions of people. I think, as you said, we need more inclusion in decision making, and that is one way to end conflict, at least theoretically. I think that would be a good point to end on. Thank you very much.